Okay, so like I said in the last video, to get at your primary conscious general function, the first thing that we have to do, and the first part of this test, is going to determine how your passive apperception is flowing. All right, so I split passive apperception into two categories. Jung basically, for the most part, teaches one, which is here on the left side. So in Jung's view, the passive function becomes reduced in quality. It becomes kind of archaic, and it becomes coupled with another function. The leading function remains abstract, and it reduces the passive function into a form that it can manipulate. In my view, that can happen one of two ways. It can happen either actively or completely unconsciously. When that happens completely unconsciously, I call it pushed in, and when that happens actively, I call it pulled in. So I'm going to try and show you quickly the basics of what's happening with a passive apperception when it's being pulled in. Here is one example called Concrete Thinking by Carl Jung. This is your phenomenal world, and this divide here is a divide that happens between the two spaces of two function spaces. Your phenomenal world is the place where you can touch and taste and sense objects and experiences in the tangible world with using abstract sensing. The knowledge and information in your mind space is a completely different space than the tangible world. Your mind has things inside, information that you can't touch with your senses, while the phenomenal world has objects and experiences which you can't perceive with your mind unless your senses give them to your mind. And your senses can't give them to your mind directly. It has to be fed into information so your mind can do logical intellectualizing with that information. Abstract thinking is using your intellect with the knowledge and information in your mind. So to understand passive apperception, it is when one function is being led by another. For the example of concrete thinking, this is when abstract thinking is led by abstract sensing. What happens is abstract thinking is turned into something that's not abstract thinking. It's turned into something called passive thinking. And an idea that's in the mind space over here on this side is brought over, pulled over into the phenomenal world. I'm going to give you an example of that. So the problem is this passive thinking in abstract sensing. When this happens, there are so many examples that are possible, and the examples tend to be very different from each other. When this happens in a type, for example, when thinking becomes passive and abstract sensing takes the lead, the personality tends to be very naturalistic. The only things that abstract sensing, that your senses can accept as a real idea, are ideas that can be explained in a tangible way. So one example of a concrete thought is the idea that life is nothing but molecules and atoms uniquely organized in the universe. In order for sensing to understand the idea of life, it has to reduce the idea to something phenomenal that it can sense with its senses. So just in general, anytime this reduction happens, and you can do this in your own mind, you can imagine scenarios where an idea is reduced into something tangible. So what the first set of interactive challenges will be used for is to determine how and what material is being pulled from what space into what space. And the theory goes that whatever space you're trying to pull the most amount of materials into in order to organize in that space is your most differentiated, most conscious space. For pushed in, it's fundamentally the same idea, except for this is happening completely unconsciously. So for the first set of challenges, we're just going to focus on pulled in or reduced passive apperception.